if the opportunity came, I'm like, yeah, I'm taking a chunk out of it. I want a piece of that blade.
This is the last chance I'm going to get at designing a Hypershock for a toy, so it had to be perfect.
They knew that they couldn't really go weapon to weapon, so they went weapon to side of weapon.
We hit the jackpot in Vegas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Outside of the Box. And I did a preview for the June 22nd NHRL event, and it was so exciting that I felt like I had to do a recap episode. Now, you will notice this is going to heavily focus on the 3 pounds because, I mean, frankly, it's the most robots. And tends to be a lot of excitement. And I would say that there was a lot of excitement surrounding 2 robots in particular. So I have Julian and Dima here to talk about the day, specifically with Mako and with Turbofiend. So welcome to the show.
I'll jump in front of my younger sibling. Hi, I'm Julian, the builder and driver of Mako. And I think I made it all the way to the top 16. But Dima piloted Turbofiend. Made it all to the...
Yeah, I made top 8.
Top
Really,
8.
I've been bragging about that to everybody who will listen for the past week, basically.
Yep.
I don't blame you. And I mean, you know, I may have a slightly different radar than most people do when they're looking at a tournament and saying like which bots I think are going to go far. I don't know how many people had Mako and Turbofiend on their bingo card, but I mean, I certainly know what Mako can potentially do. And Turbofiend was certainly interesting to me as well. So I don't think I was super surprised, but I was very excited to see, you know, both robots do so well. We'll get into talking about like kind of the day for both of you. I will say, like, with Mako in particular, and probably because like Julian, you're somebody that I talk to fairly frequently and you post updates about your robot. But this was a robot that I first noticed in January, the only time that I was at NHRL this year, mostly because I was in your pod essentially, and I was like, I don't want to fight that. I was very afraid that my robot was going to get cut in half, and in fact, because I lost to Nate Franklin in the first round, I did not end up having to face you. But if I had beat Nate, I would have had to face you. So blessing in disguise, because you did end up dismantling your next opponent pretty handily, and therefore I ended up not having to fight them because they had to forfeit. So Mako is certainly a pretty intimidating robot. How were you feeling going into this event about how Mako was going to do?
Feeling pretty good. Since the last NHRL, I think we did a total of 4 tournaments and 3 with Mako. And before this, I had talked to Ricky, and I was basically like, hey, how fast can I actually spin this song? And he was like 400 miles per hour, basically. So I was going to be spinning faster than ever. I made a few small upgrades to Mako, but overall, like, just slowly getting it dialed in, and I knew I had the opportunity to do some good stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, as we saw. Now, Dima, you know, how are you feeling about Turbofiend? Because I mean, I think people are probably more familiar with Turbo Friend. So I'm curious, you know, what was going through your head going into this as well.
So Turbofiend had only competed at one tournament before, and it was a Jersey tournament G Scroll, and it had gone through a pretty, I don't want to say like a serious overhaul, but really significant changes since then. So it wasn't the same level of hopefulness where it's like, oh, we're really dialed in and have this bot tuned. My bots, when they come to NHRL, are on the scale of like dialed into experimental, or way more on the scale of experimental compared to Julian specifically. So I was more just like, I'm gonna drive my heart out and get all the data we can, but I did not expect the top 8.
I would agree with that.
Sometimes you just never know. Before we get into like the actual bracket stuff, I mean, how did you both feel about how the robots performed in the qualifying rounds?
I think, well, you're making me talk about the worst part of the day was no, I was up against Loopy in the very first match, and people who know, it's a crazy torque walker with 2 big spinners on top, like literally the worst matchup Mako could come up against, and they're a former world champ. But so Mako got smashed around a lot, but I survived. I made it to the bell. I'm totally jinxing myself and putting a target on my back here, but Mako's never been knocked out at an NHRL or tapped out. So come get me. Uh, but after that, I faced Send It, which is the crazy opportunity I had to cut them essentially in half, which is a bit of an exaggeration, but not quite. It was pretty dang close to going all the way through in half.
You had another match in pools, right? You
Oh.
had 3, yeah.
Oh, the third one was going to be, they ended up having to forfeit. It was sheer stupidity. They just couldn't get their bot working, unfortunately. But it was a very cool robot. It's a newer robot, and sometimes if you take some damage, you can't always get it up and ready.
Yeah.
Oh, is it my turn to answer the same question?
Yes,
Sorry.
go ahead, Dima.
Okay. So we knew as soon as brackets were released that Turbofiend's first opponent was Synthesis. Turbofiend, not ever having been at NHRL, was unseeded or had lowest possible seed, and so it makes sense that early in qualifying rounds you're going to face best of the best, the goats, the gods, and we in days ahead of it, we were looking at Synthesis matches and preparing, and I was watching him drive, and we were trying to find any weaknesses that we could. And at the end of the day, there's not clear faults with that bot, so it was kind of just like hype yourself up, drive your heart out, and do the best you can. But then we actually got in the cage, and doing the best that I can ended up being enough. And after the first 30 seconds or so of the fight, I felt really confident like we were going to take it home as long as we didn't have to deal with any like critical weapon or electronic failures, and we didn't. I did my best not to send things directly into Synthesis's weapon, and that it happened a couple times where we did go weapon to weapon, but ended up working out in my favor. And it was my favorite fight that I've ever had at NHRL, any robot combat event. It's really amazing opportunity to fight him in the cage, and really thrilled about that victory. I'm still holding on to that just as much as like the top 8 victory. Beating Synthesis matters just as much as getting in a top 8 no matter what bot you face. And then the second round I had in qualifying rounds was Thistle, which is a bot from the UK with a ridiculously big and strong and scary weapon. A really like a steamroller kind of drum with a
500 grams.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly.
Yeah, I remember that number. A 500-gram drum. That the drum is bigger than the rest of the bot. So if you actually look at it, the back part with the drive and the motherboard, everything else, it really does look like a steamroller. It's like the chassis in the back and then a big drum in the front. And we went head to head really a lot, and I beat up the drum a little bit, but I beat up some electrical components in the back. I think just enough for us to get the win. But that was a scary fight too. That fight was just as scary as Synthesis. That could have been easily just like that drum runs into you and your weapon's toast. That was a really good fight, and I was happy to take that one home too. And then I only two victories in qualifiers meant that I was on to the rest of the rounds.
I just want to jump in and talk about how much getting a win over Synthesis means to both of us, just because Synthesis is just an amazing robot. Corey is an amazing builder and person. It was my second tournament ever. It was a maker battle, and Corey was sat next to me, and he was just talking to me nicely, and asking me questions like, so what are you gonna do next time? And I was like starstruck, and it's like, wow, Corey is such an amazing builder. He's also a very nice guy, and it just means so much that Dima and our robot was able to steal a win off of him. I'm sure he's planning our demise, planning for our revenge as we speak.
Well, and I think that really what that match showed, if it should show anything to anybody, is to not count yourself out ever. To, even if you're going up against like this great bot that's had all of these wins, you never say, I'm not going to win this. Like that's kind of similar to how I felt going up against Loophole last year. A lot of people were giving me condolences, but I was like, all I can do is do my best, and you never know what's going to happen. I unfortunately did not win that, but obviously big congrats to Dima for being able to do that. Yeah.
There was a day during the week, I think it was Wednesday before NHRL. I was at Julian's house to do some driving practice with Turbofiend, and like as I was leaving the house, he was like, "You don't be too upset if we don't end up beating Synthesis. Like it's a long shot." Like, kind of like saying like, don't really expect to win, or don't get super duper disappointed if you don't get this huge long shot victory. And as I was walking out the door, I was just like, I'm gonna win. I'm gonna win. It'll be fine. I'm gonna win it. And I said that just enough times for me to actually like start believing it. And I think that was really necessary for getting into the cage at least, because first fight of the day, that could have been the time for the most jitters of the day too. But I felt really calm, and like we were loading up in the cage, I was just like, I got this. Like, you really have to talk yourself out of the fear just as much as you do have to talk yourself up, and that it worked.
Yeah, definitely. And you both got into the bracket, of course. So we'll talk about the first round fights for both of you. Mako had Deepstone Lullaby, and Turbofiend had TBD Today, which honestly, TBD Today really surprised me. Prior to that, they had just like a really, really good fight. And so I was like, that there could be something there to worry about. But I'm curious how both of you felt, and particularly you, Julian, because you knew at that point that if you won that match, you were fighting Chainsaw Kitty next. You knew that already. So I'm just curious to hear what you thought about that.
I like Dima and I used to compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu a lot, and that's sort of given us like a medal, if you will, where it's like we try our best to rise to the occasion. And the thing about robots is like even if you get completely demolished, you'll be walking home. Like nothing that bad's gonna happen compared to like your knee breaking or something. So like I know I'm not great yet, but like I love the pressure. I love the chance to face I want to face the best of the best. So I was excited at the opportunity. And me and Kazai even, crossed paths and we're like, we're on a collision course. And she was like, I'll be ready. But actually, Deepstone Lullaby, it was funny. We were walking down and he came up to me and he was like, bro, if you get me pinned, I'm tapping out right away. And it's like, all right, make sure you bang on the glass and get my attention. So yeah, he got pinned right away and he tapped out, and I spun the saw up just to appease the crowd a little bit. I wasn't gonna attack him, but you gotta keep everyone a little scared, I guess.
He did a really emphatic tap on the cage where it was like, "Yep, you got me."
Yeah. So that was anytime you could just get a win without having to really do any damage to yourself or your opponent, that's great for both of us, actually. So yeah.
I do respect people who tap at a sign of danger like that. They really do know. Like sometimes it's good to see, like, yeah, kill me, give me the carnage. But like these bots cost money,
Yeah.
Yeah. And Dima with TBD Today.
Yeah, that bot, you see a really compact bot that looks like a little piece of military machinery, and you don't underestimate those bots. Those bots those super compact drum bots are like really hard to kill. They could mess you up in an instant. One stray shot and everything inside of you gets jostled around. Everything inside the bot, rather, not me particularly. But it was kind of just a thing where it's like, don't underestimate. Don't put yourself in any bad circumstances. Play it safe, and we can take it home. And that's kind of what I did for that whole fight. It was really just like, take all the hits that I can, but get it away when I need to. And it went to the judges. It wasn't a KO either way. And I think I won on damage, aggression, and control. But it was a lot closer than a unanimous judge's decision makes it think. Because a couple wrong moves or I get flipped on my head too many times, I could have absolutely lost on control there and aggression.
Yeah. Yeah. You never know how, like, that's why judges' decisions, it can be iffy. You never know how it's going to go. But that was good that you were able to get the win on that. Now we'll go to the aforementioned Mako versus Chainsaw Kitty. And I'll tell you, I was watching that fight and I didn't really know how it was going to go. At first, obviously later on, details came out about what was going on with Chainsaw Kitty, and I think like that made a little bit more sense. Because I know Keziah, and part of me is like, I don't know if Keziah would just tap in that situation, but it sounds like there was a little bit more going on there. But I will tell you, I think people were just shocked, like literally shocked when that happened.
Right. I think, yeah, they were definitely shocked. It was funny. Dima and I were down there at the cage, and you look like to our left, and there's like all the staff is down there to watch too. Like people were excited for this, especially after I'd send it in half, scared off another bot. It's like maybe Mako has a chance. Unfortunately, the match started. Chainsaw Kitty's weapon spun up for like a split second, but then the robot just sort of died. So I snuck around to the side and I spun up my saw and like gave it like a small tap, and I was like, "You want it again? You want it again?" And she tapped out. But any moment, because I could have burst to life and started killing me, which is why I even went for the one hit.
Yeah, she wasn't tapping. She was actively trying to get her bot to work at that moment. So it wasn't like we're just gonna let you sit still. It was like, okay, the fight's still going.
Yeah. But I was very excited for that matchup. Obviously, no one wants to win that way. And I've told her that myself. I was like, we can grudge, or I'm sure we're going to find each other in the brackets again eventually. Chainsaw Kitty is just an amazing robot. And it's a really interesting matchup because if you get those two robots in the cage next to each other, Chainsaw Kitty is so much smaller than Mako, even though if it hits me, it's going to send me flying just as much as any other robot. But it would just be really interesting to see how the heck that is going to play out when we meet again, which I'm sure we will.
Plus, everybody loves the Animal Planet fights.
Right.
Shark versus cat.
I didn't even think of it that way, but you're right. It's an animal fight for sure. I know I always gravitate towards the food fights myself. So, and then Turbofiend had Red Pearl, who had a pretty good day up to that point. What were you thinking about matching up against them?
Believe it or not, that was one of the most scared that I had been to that point, and it was because I hadn't seen Red Pearl fight yet, but I looked at their previous records. Everybody's doing a little scoping out in the pits, and I looked at previous brackets and saw that they had beaten Red Panda, who I was marginally afraid of for fights that I had seen. So I thought, oh crud, there's the real damage potential here. And we were walking down the cage, and we were looking at each other's bots and sizing each other up, and we were talking about our backgrounds, etc. And that alleviated some of my fears just in terms of like being friendly with the other person. And then we got in the cage and just did the same thing I did all day, which is drive my heart out. And I was getting really comfortable with the vert to that point in the day, because like I said, we'd only fought with Turbofiend at one other tournament, so this is my second tournament ever driving a vert. So vert to vert, you kind of get those in match sort of feelings. It's like, oh, I feel when your gyro is going to kick up, or like, oh, I feel you feel when my gyro is going to kick up. So I was able to get some really, 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 some really key, like good hit moments that led into an awesome KO that I'm really proud of. KO / tap out.
Yeah. It's always nice when you get either a KO or a tap out, because like I said, I kind of alluding to before, the judges' decisions you never really know for sure. So it's best to go that route. Now the next round, the round of 16, I think was interesting for a couple of reasons, and one of those being that, again, like knowing the future, that you both would have realized that if you both won your matches, you would have fought each other. First of all, before we get into like the actual matches that you had, what were you like? Were you talking about that at all? The possibility of fighting each other?
Yeah. Julian just shook his head, but we were. I said something to the effect of, I'm probably just gonna I would forfeit against you, right? In not as a sense of humility, but like, oh, I would rather you go further. And then he said something like, I won't let you. And so we were fully ready to just like really kill each other in that fight if it came to pass. And then figure out the repairs later. But yeah, we were ready to like actually go for it against each other.
Yeah. And we didn't make it. We didn't qualify. But if we had faced off, the winner would have qualified,
Yep.
which is just crazy. And we didn't, but we're getting there. Maybe next time.
That's
Yeah.
definitely maybe a next time moment.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, Julian, you had probably like one of the worst bots that you could face for Mako in facing off against the greatest challenge. Because, as I always like to say when I've watched robot fights, when you have a weapon like a hammer or a hammer saw style weapon, you have to have something to hit. And that robot seems very difficult to hit. What was your experience in that? I mean, I definitely felt for you the entire time. I'm like, no.
Well, I was joking on the way down to Dima. I was like, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pin him and just hit him right in the middle, just right in the center of the robot. And if you know the robot, there's nothing in the middle. But also, it was a very difficult robot to pin down. Similar to Loopy, but less destructive. I could just never get a single pin. I made the mistake, potential mistake of using longer forks. And by then the floor was so ripped up that even if I could ping them against the wall, they were already spun up by the time I could get back into position. So that was tough. I kind of, towards the end, I turned around, just spun up my saw to try to get some aggression points. And my saw survived that somehow. So it was a frustrating loss. I definitely did lose. But fighting a meltybrain is just so dang hard. I'm gonna build one at some point. I know that. I'm gonna build every robot at some point. But yeah, I've got some new configs coming up for when Mako has to face crazy robots like Loopy or the Greatest Challenge. And I don't want to say what they are, but when people see them, they're gonna be very surprised.
I'm curious for that fight. I mean, was the floor being pretty torn up a factor? Because when I had watched like all of the fights all day, I think I saw most of Mako's fights, and I was like, wow, Julian is driving like fantastic, like as close to perfect as you could. And I didn't feel like your driving was quite the same in that fight. And I didn't know if it was like the floor or if it's just because that bot is difficult to like position yourself against.
Yeah, it was partially the floor, but partially because it's not so much about getting like the first hit. Like on a vert, I can almost just play like, come at me, bro. Just sit there with my forks. Against them, I have to like have the initial collision and then reorient myself and get right back up to them as quick as I can. And this iteration of Mako is just not great at that. And like I said earlier, I put on longer forks, which didn't really help me. I'm not sure if they necessarily hurt me, but longer forks kind of makes it harder to turn, makes it harder to deal with all the holes in the floor. But it's very possible that if that match happened, with very clean floors, the same dang thing would happen. I just could not pin those guys down. I was excited and happy that in like the last 30 seconds I ran at them with my saw backwards, caused some sparks and it didn't fall off. So that was fun.
It was a fun fight for sure.
Oh, for sure. A little frustrating, but like I'm losing to former world champions and like a crazy melty brain that was around like 3 years ago before I even knew about NHRL. It's like I got to take some perspective sometime and just appreciate the moment and just win or lose. It's amazing, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And then Dima, you had glacial undercut. So kind of walk me through that one for you.
That match was awesome. I don't recall if this is a Yukon specific team that does those, ice themed robots. They had multiple ice themed robots today, but not Ice Blade, I think. I think Ice Blade was somebody else. But regardless, I was excited to face them. It was my first time sending Turbofiend up against an undercutter or any horizontal spinner, really, any similar config to that. The fight was kind of in my favor from the get-go. I don't want to sound like, oh, it was a blowout, but I got some good hits to their drive early, and in a match like that, that's kind of the defining factor. It lets you dictate the driving, it lets you dictate every engage from then forward. Um, that one was kind of that one is another tap out situation, but it was kind of awkward because I think they were attempting to go for an unstick first, and they tried to tap unstick on the button on the cage, but they accidentally went tap out, and then they had to say to the ref, "We want the unstick." And we on our side were like, "Is this an unstick or are you tapping? Like, or should I stop or should I continue attacking you?" Um, and the if you go back and watch the stream, it actually they said tap out with the big graphic and everything, but it wasn't a tap out. There was like 30 seconds more after that. They just wanted the unstick. So after they got unstuck, the fight kept going, and I hit them a few more times, and then it really was a KO. That was an awesome fight though. Their bot is a big bot, and like I said, it's my first time facing a horizontal. I was kind of nervous about their weapon just being so held together that it could go weapon to weapon with me easily and shred me or shred my guards or shred my forks. But like I said, some good hits to the drive early meant that I didn't have to deal with the weapon so much. And eventually their internals started coming out, and then it was all over.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that actually led into then, of course, you having to also face the greatest challenge. And honest, like
Can
for
we
me,
cut this early?
I was like, I mean, I thought it was very close. And certainly I think to that point, you had done the most against them of like really anybody that I'd seen the entire time. It was very, very close. I mean, how did you feel like coming away from it? Did you feel like you had a chance?
Yeah, I really did feel like the judges could have handed that to me, but part of that is A, not seeing what the judges saw, only seeing my angle of the cage, and B, never having faced the melty brain and being a little confused as to how judges are going to judge things like aggression and control on a melty brain specifically. I thought that I had a relatively healthy level of aggression in that fight, and I thought I had a good level of control, but I had a pin on them at one point that didn't count because they're donut shaped and they were kind of all the way on my forks. And no matter what I did, I couldn't disengage that pin. I don't even think they were touching the barbs on my forks. And when that happens, the pin doesn't count for you. And from there, maybe if that pin counted, I could have wrestled some more control points my way, but there were a couple times where I got on my head, had to self right quickly, but still that counts against you. My weapon died with like a minute 15 left on the clock, I think, and I was still trying to run metal into them to get them to stop spinning, but if your weapon's down, I don't know if that's really aggression with your weapon. Um, and obviously the only damage I did to them was some dents in their plating, which might affect them later, but they a weak point in our weapon that was bolted directly to the motor, not bolted, but you know what I mean, attached directly to our hub motor. That weapon came apart pretty tragically. It wasn't like a little break where I could still spin it a little bit. It was like a big break where even if you spin it, nothing good's gonna happen. So the weapon could still spin at the end a little, but it wasn't because of the way it had broken. It actually couldn't make a full rotation because the tooth would hit my own chassis. Uh, it was a really good fight and really, really like put the challenge of my driving on because I had to do what Julian did earlier, and I am maybe 9/10 of the driver that Julian is. So that little extra split second where I wasn't reorienting to face them after we collided and I got bumped away, Julian realigns perfectly in an instant with Mako when that happens. I had a harder time doing that, but also harder time because of gyro and harder time because we're still dialing in that bot a little bit. But those were really the factors that the judges saw that and they said unanimous decision for greatest challenge. And I'm the kind of person that is upset about a loss no matter how it happens. So I'm still like, oh man, I wish I qualified, but it was a great fight and a deserved win for them.
Very deserved. And
Yeah.
I think if the weapon Blade survived. We landed a few more big hits because Dima bounced him like off the wall a few times, which is always exciting. But you know, if the weapon's alive for the second half, maybe if that keeps happening, we, you know, eke out a decision. But
Or just another pin and then being able to disengage, I could have got control points. There's a lot of things that could have happened in my favor.
fans and butts or whatever the phrase is.
Yeah, but in the same exact way, I also could have said, well, if it was any bot other than Greatest Challenger for my qualifying match, I could have had a much better shot. So this, you could layer on the ifs and buts as much as you want, but still, if we were just it was on us to have that bot a little more dialed in. But you know, same deal. It had just had great overhauls since the last G scroll. Our first time running this particular configuration. Losing in top 8 due to it not being dialed in it's a good place to be, because that really gives you the we got it next time feeling.
Yeah, for sure. Now I'm curious to hear an opinion from both of you, because after that, the Greatest Challenge went on to face Jelly Baby, and Jelly Baby beat them. And so I'm curious from both of your perspectives, where do you think Jelly Baby was successful that nobody else had been all day with them?
I think Jelly Baby is even wider than Mako.
And wider than me too.
Yeah, and Jelly Baby's got sort of wobbly forks, especially the outer ones. So I'm wondering if the metal forks on Mako caused it to be more like clanging, versus Turbofiend has got, you know, wobbly forks. So maybe it sort of dissipated them, slowed them down instead of bouncing them away. And the same thing with Jelly Baby. She's so low to the ground, she sort of slows him down and gets under him. So yeah, it's like I don't want to say it's a rock, paper, scissors, and it's really not, because Jelly Baby is a tremendous robot. She beat Mako, and I still have to get revenge. But it's a great control bot, like clearly the premier lifter right now, by a long shot.
To be clear, that's only because that we're running Turbofiend instead of Friend right now. Just kidding. I watched that fight live cage side, but I don't remember all 3 minutes exactly. I remember she had great pins that she could disengage, was getting full control over. I remember her lifter being kind of, I don't want to say the perfect shape, but a really good shape for being able to get under and actually lift the Greatest Challenge donut shape. You kind of have to have your lifter right on the donut. She did, and it worked out well for her. And you know, the TPU forks, she wasn't clanging off. She was able to re-engage and stay engaged and really control that fight. Great piloting, great design, and control bots kind of have to be meta calls. So all of the meta calls that were made for Jelly Baby worked out in that matchup. I'm very jealous, extremely jealous.
I'm a Jelly Baby. Yeah.
Yeah,
Understandable. Yeah, it was a great match, and you know, exciting to see a robot like Jelly Baby go all the way to the finals. I mean, people don't realize, they talked about this on the stream, like that robot has knockouts. Like it is very good. So
and I loved I don't know if we want to do spoilers, but in her match against Warhard, the end, she's fighting to the bitter end, which I just love. The robot is, the drive is dead, she's just flapping around. That's exactly what I would do with Mako. And you know,
I have done exactly that with Turbofiend.
come kill me, I'm still here, come kill me. So Jelly Baby's an awesome robot. I don't know Paige that well, but our interaction with her has been great, and yeah, I love it.
I'm a big control bot fan, so also massive respect to the control bot that made it to finals, the control bot that I want to steal ideas from design wise. Yeah, that's an amazing, I really love that bot. I love watching it. I was happy to see it cage side, both against the Greatest Challenge, getting revenge for us, obviously, even though it's not what she's thinking about whatsoever, but also the finals match was just fantastic.
Yeah.
yeah, agreed. It was a great tournament, very entertaining, as I knew it would be. And I guess my last question for both of you is, you know, takeaways from that event, and are you planning on going to September, or what's the kind of the next step?
Well, one thing, I don't even think I've told anyone this, but my first tournament I did like a year ago in August. I was sitting there, I'd just gotten eliminated, and I texted Dima and I was like, give me a year and I'm qualifying. Um, which is obviously very difficult, especially now that Mako might not get in for the rest of the year. But like, I really want to qualify, and I know how hard that is. I could have very easily got smashed in the first round, but like, I would just love it so much if Mako could qualify or Turbofiend could qualify, because Turbofiend has a much better chance of getting in for September. And I don't know if we've actually said it, but like, Dima, we're registering Turbofiend, right?
Yeah, gotta.
Yeah, and I'm registering Mako, and there's a chance it'll get in. But yeah, I'm doing, I would do this every weekend if I could. Like, I love this stuff so much. Dima has other stuff going on in her life, but I drag her into it, and we work great together, and it's awesome.
I love this to death too. I also am a competitive Tekken player and have been very busy in my career, but um, part of it is just like, if not for Julian, I wouldn't be able to do this, really, in all honesty. Everything that I learn comes from Julian if I'm not trying to self-teach the gaps in my knowledge elsewhere. Um, his not only is his enthusiasm for it infectious, but like we do have this like sibling ESP a little bit where we kind of can finish each other's thoughts. So some of those car rides to and from NHRL are when we get the most thinking and designing done, or the very most like shooting down each other's ideas until we get like the really good idea to come out. So the takeaway just ends up being try harder, we'll get it. Because what else can you even say after an event like that? We were so close to qualifying. We can't have any other takeaway other than we just got it next time.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I can safely say that of people that haven't qualified, there's probably few people that I want to qualify more than the two of you. So
Thank you so much.
I hope that you get it. I definitely understand. Of course, I express my love of robots in different ways. I don't know how to build very well, so instead I just talk to people that do as much as I can. So very excited to be able to hear your thoughts and breakdown of what went on in June. I'm so excited to see what happens in September. I'm sure that you'll both kill it. And yeah, like the future is bright for Mako and Turbofiend.
Thank you so much.
Thank
We
you.
love your podcast, your YouTube channel.
We're so happy. We're just so happy to be here. We've been looking forward to this all week.
Yep.
That is great to hear. Well, if you're watching this right now, stay tuned, as we are going to also have a segment with Paige from Jelly Baby to continue the Jelly Baby love. So keep watching, and we'll have more for you in just a second. And we're back for the second half of this episode. And now with me, I have Paige of Jelly Baby. And I'm so excited to talk to you. I mean, this was obviously a great event. I think, the interesting thing for me was I don't think anybody should have been too surprised about Jelly Baby, because this is a robot that had already qualified. So I'm curious, like going into the qualifying rounds and everything, what were your thoughts? I mean, did you expect to go as far as you did?
Um, it was kind of, I didn't quite know what to expect. The day started off really rough. Like my robot wasn't quite put together yet at the start of the day, and I really wasn't feeling well. Like a lot of my team was like helping putting the finishing touches on Jelly Baby. Like as I was in the hotel room, just really not feeling well. Once I felt better, I was able to get back to the competition, and I was very close to not even competing this competition. Uh, I was very fortunate. Well, I guess not fortunate, but you know, my first opponent stepped down from the fight. So they forfeited the fight before it began, and my bot was just barely put together. It passed safety. I was ready to go, but it definitely wasn't up to like I'm ready to fight anything standards. But I was very happy once I was able to get my footing and I was able to start winning fights. Probably one of the biggest things about this competition is kind of showing myself that it wasn't just a fluke the first time. Because it's like the first time I've ever gotten past the first 2 rounds of any competition. It's like, oh wow, I went really far this time. I wonder if it was just me being lucky. And then I did it again. I was like, oh, maybe I actually have a robot. That's a good format.
Yeah, I definitely understand the imposter syndrome for sure. That comes with having like a successful event and you kind of question everything, but obviously, that this was not a fluke. Given what happened in qualifying, you did end up getting a bye in the first round. And so you had to wait and you ended up facing Stag Beetlebot first, which is definitely no slouch. Michael's been working on that bot for quite some time, and it's been really good as a control bot in its own right. What was your strategy going into that first fight, and being able to get a KO too? I mean, people don't necessarily always think that control bots can do that, but Jelly Baby clearly can.
Yeah, I kind of just approach every fight in the almost the same manner. Is just find a way to get under them in a very consistent way, hold the pin up to 5 seconds, and then do my best to like pop them up into a position that they get stuck in. I was really surprised that I was able to get 2 more knockouts on top of the 2 I got in the previous competition, bringing Jelly Baby's total up to 4 knockouts as the control bot. I was very excited that all my upgrades had resulted in just a lot more reliable behavior and it doing things that normally people don't associate with control bots.
Yeah, 100%. Now, what was interesting for me is, after that, you ended up facing Ghastly, and Ghastly, like, honestly, had a really good day. That bot was looking really great. Now, I will say that even at that, like, Jelly Baby is certainly, I've obviously never fought it, but watching as many fights as I have, it's a really looks like a very difficult robot to fight, even for a bot that has, a powerful weapon and has been, knocking people apart. I guess, your strategy, like you said, for that one was probably just like any other fight. But you were able to get them in a judge's decision.
Yeah, everyone I faced, everyone I do face, I try to approach very carefully. Like I kind of approach everything kind of the same way. As like make sure you get under them, hold the pin for a certain amount of time. But there are definitely bots that lend themselves to being controlled by my format a lot better than others. Like a lot of people just straight up lose the rock, paper, scissors against me, which is good, but it also means that I lose the rock, paper, scissors very hard against the other formats. Yeah, all the bots were super, super good that I faced. Ghastly in particular, I remember like going over and looking at it and being like, I hope the drum spinner doesn't just like I hope the drum spinner doesn't catch on my fork prongs because I have little protrusions on the front. I always worry about anything that gets kind of closer to the floor catching on those consistently, but luckily it didn't happen as much as I was worried about it.
Yeah, that would definitely always be a worry. Now, like I'm skipping ahead a little bit just because a lot of the matches, like you said, it's kind of going to be the same strategy for you, but it's funny that the robot's called the greatest challenge, and it certainly seemed to be the greatest challenge for a lot of people that day. I talked to, Julian and Dima, and they both faced the greatest challenge as well. And I think like they were people who I thought had really good shots of doing something to it. And I think Dima got really close, was able to do stuff that nobody had. But then I think Jelly Baby took that one step further, and you were really able to corral that robot in a way that nobody else had been able to do all day. Was that a concern for you? Because it's just a really hard robot to pin down.
I remember watching Dima's fight against the greatest challenge, and I thought like, oh, I really want to fight that robot. It looks so like the greatest challenge is one of my favorite robots. I love melty brains. I think melty brains are one of the coolest like kind of bot that you could have. And the greatest challenge is like one of the better, like one of the best melty brains in NHRL's competition. And being able to go up against them was super exciting. But I remember watching Dima's fight against the greatest challenger going, maybe I don't want to fight the greatest challenge. It looks like that's hitting way harder than I'm expecting. But yeah, one of the hardest things against going against the greatest challenge was actually one of the fights previous. Radix, I think. I'm probably saying that wrong. They did some major damage to my bot. They revealed some big weaknesses in the way I was retaining my motors, which actually popped up later against Warhard, which is why my drive failed in both fights. So I was like, okay, I need to replace the chassis before I fight the greatest challenge. And that was not a quick thing to do. I was in the pits hurriedly like soldering things back together, putting everything back together, and I had to go into that fight like not knowing how my robot was going to behave. So I was like, okay, please everything work. Okay, it drives. Oh no, all my controls are wrong. Luckily, I was able to just adapt enough to be able to take the JD, but it was definitely scary going against such a dangerous bot with like having my controls handicapped, essentially.
It's funny though how many times people have ended up winning fights that way. That it happens to be messed up, and somehow you just find a way. So I mean I guess that's extra impressive that you were able to pull that through given what you were dealing with. Now the Warhard fight, I mean, at that point, I was just full on pulling for Jelly Baby. Like, no shame to John and Warhard. I mean, like, that's an amazing robot, and I think probably one of people's favorites to win the whole thing before, any matches even happened. But Jelly Baby put up one heck of a fight, and it really made for, I think, one of the most entertaining fights of the whole night, because you just didn't have any quit in the robot. I mean, you kept trying no matter what was happening, and I thought that was great, because that's all you can do, is just leave it all out there.
The Warhard fight was, I know I lost that fight, but I am so pleased with the result. It gave me so much information about the weaknesses of my bot, and it was so fun. And I'm really a lot of people say that some control bots are just control bot fights are kind of boring. I'm glad I could like show that Jelly Baby is very fun, and control bots can be very fun, even when they're losing. But one of the issues I had with that fight in particular was with my control setup again, because I tried to go in and correct everything from the greatest challenge fight. What I thought it was is I thought I inverted my controls, like channel 1 was set to channel 2. That's what I thought it was. What turns out happened was I replaced one of the motors, and I just had the polarities wrong. So one motor was spinning in the opposite direction. So spinning the robot made it go straight, and accelerating the robot made it turn. And so I swapped the channels back, and then I realized what was happening. And so I changed the setting. I inverted the one control, so it started doing that again. But when I went to the Warhard fight, my controls were inverted. So turning left made me go right, and turning right made me go left. So when I got cut up on the Peter's mini bot, I wasn't actually aiming for the mini bot. I was aiming to go around it, but I just went in the complete opposite direction of what I was expecting. I was like, oh no. And it was pretty downhill immediately from there.
Yeah, I had wondered about that. And, you know, like part of the other thing that I was curious about too is that like that mini bot is, you know, a similar type of style as far as being a control bot and having like all of the forks and stuff like that. Was it interesting to have that bot in the mix when it's, you know, similar in the way that Jelly Baby is set up in some ways to kind of have to deal with that?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really have too much of an opportunity to try to maneuver around it. Warheart, I think, took out one of my motors within the first 30 seconds of the fight. But yeah, mini bots always get me scared. Anytime I see somebody walk up to the cage with a mini bot, I'm like, no, why does it have to be a mini bot? And Peter's design very much capitalizes on here's the duty of a mini bot is to get your opponent immobilized so the bigger robot can hit as hard as possible. And Peter did a great job driving it around, and really good design, really durable design. I know that it got kicked around pretty hard by Warheart too, and it just kept going. It was very tricky to maneuver around.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that. Now, one thing that I was curious about, like looking back on like how these two events, you know, going so far and everything like that went for you when you came up with the bot in the first place. I mean, were these all like considerations that you had in the design? Because I would say that generally speaking, bots that can win the ground game, especially bots that have pretty low ground clearance and it's harder to find something to hit, tend to be really successful. I mean, you know, we've seen that with full court, like we've seen that with some other robots. Was that part of the thought process when you designed it?
Oh, that question came into my mind very strongly at a point during Jelly Baby's redesign. Because a lot of things changed from the first competition I competed in to this competition. And one of the things I was considering was making Jelly Baby like perfectly invertible, like having it so if it gets flipped over, it's the same robot. I decided not to do that for a number of reasons, and one of them is just ground clearance. Because if I were to make it perfectly invertible, yes, it would be like easier to like I'd have to worry less about being inverted, but I'd also have a greater angle of incline to my robot, which would make my ground game less strong. So I decided to stay with the original format. But yeah, I definitely considered it. Also, the smoothness of the top of the robot was also a concern. There were many things. But yeah, I try to get things as close to the ground as possible, and it's something I'm always thinking about whenever I'm designing a fork or the floppy wedges.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that there's still robots that are designed that could, you know, attack a robot like that more easily. I mean, an overhead like saw type of robot like Mako comes to mind. But for the most part, there's not a lot of robots that I think can do well against the type of robot that you have. And as somebody who is a huge fan of lifters and control bots, I definitely love it. I love to see it. And, you know, I'm glad that you've been able to have such success with it. Now, are you planning on trying to run it again this year, or just planning for finals?
As many competitions as they'll let me get into, I plan to go to all of them. I really want to get like right now. Obviously, I'd love to win a dumpster. That's like everyone's goal when going in. It's like, get the dumpster. But really, the ultimate goal above that is just design refinement, making sure that Jelly Baby is as strong as possible before finals. So when I get to finals, I'm competing with the best possible bot. I could have.
Yeah, and this may be a controversial question, but who gets a dumpster first, Jelly or Kitty?
I have no idea. Honestly, I'm shocked Kitty hasn't gotten a dumpster yet. Kitty, oh, Kazaya has built one of my favorite robots of all time. I love Kitty. Every single time Kitty goes into the cage, it's just an absolute treat to see what it does. Um, I have no idea. I think we have a discussion of like, oh, who would win in a fight, me or you? And I'm like, well, you have Reina driving the mini bot, so I think you have quite an edge over me, even though my robot's specifically designed to take hits from Chainsaw Kitty. Like all my design principles when designing Jelly Baby was, okay, will this survive Chainsaw Kitty?
I mean, isn't that what everybody should be considering in their design choices,
Yeah.
realistically?
Can one take a hit from Chainsaw Kitty? Yes, my robot can absolutely take abuse from Chainsaw Kitty. How long can it take that abuse? I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like to me, especially given like that you held up pretty good versus Warhard, the material. I think that's a lot of what like Julian and Dima and I discuss. Like the type of material may play some factor in being able to hold up well, because I think that people may think that more like steel and stuff is the way to go, but honestly, like not always. There's some give and take no matter what material you use for your bot, I think.
Material density is definitely something I'm always thinking about. It's like, oh, I could have like bigger forks, more AR500, but like AR500 is so much more dense. I can get so much more thickness and armor out of TPU than I can like any amount of like metal or carbon fiber.
Yeah, exactly. Like I've told a lot of people, it's still not fighting Chainsaw Kitty, but I had the unfortunate pleasure of fighting Loophole last year and didn't take a lot of damage. But my armor around Poison Apple is all TPU, so like it held up pretty well against that. So I'm a big fan of TPU as armor.
Yeah, I all my
Unless you're
robots
fighting
have.
Dutch Oven.
Oh, let's not talk about firebots. I'm trying to like imagine just firebots don't exist. They're not real. They can't hurt me. No, I'm working on a contingency plan for firebots in the future.
Well, it might be a good idea because Clyde is real and Clyde is going to be in the finals as well. So
No, I don't wanna. Please, please, somebody kill Clyde before it gets to me. I will fight anybody else.
I definitely understand. Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to see what Jelly Baby is going to do. I believe in the robot, and I think that at some point like it's inevitable that you're going to win a dumpster with it, if it keeps performing the way that it has been. So
Thank you for the vote of confidence.
that's what I'm here for. Yeah, I mean, I like to ask everybody this, but is Jelly Baby? I mean, is that like that's your bot? That's what you're running with, or is there like you have any other crazy ideas about bot designs?
I have one robot that I've been considering building, but it kind of skirts the rules in a way, but also like I don't see any explicit rules against what I'm planning. I'm not gonna give it away just in case if I do like implement it for January, but Yes, I have been thinking of a very lucrative control bot configuration.
Well, that's exciting, and it's something that I'm definitely going to be watching out for, and I'm sure a lot of other people will as well. There's a lot of Sleepy Anime Girl fans out there, so exciting to see what you do with that.
Be afraid. My goal for this one is to get new rules written after it.
Sounds interesting and exciting. Well, yeah, we'll see what happens with that. We'll certainly be seeing what happens with finals a little bit further into the years. There's still a couple more events left to go, but so exciting to talk about a robot like Jelly Baby, and continuing to see it do well. So for anybody that's watching, please make sure that you like, subscribe, follow, comment, all of that good stuff. Root for Jelly Baby because it's the best thing that you can do. And we'll see everybody next time on the show.